The rain battered the glass walls of the Manhattan penthouse, a storm so fierce it seemed to scream secrets the city couldn't keep. Inside, a 5-year-old boy wailed, his cries piercing through the opulent silence of the 50th floor suite. His tiny fists clutched the edges of his silk blanket, his face red with desperation. The room was a fortress of wealth: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a view of the skyline that cost millions, but none of it could calm him. Nannies, dressed in crisp uniforms, hovered helplessly, their whispers drowned by his sobs. "He's been like this for hours," one muttered, glancing at the clock. It was 2 a.m., and the boy's father, Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, was nowhere to be found. But in the shadows of the hallway, a young woman stood quietly, her hands folded, her worn apron a stark contrast to the luxury around her. She was the maid, unnoticed by most, but tonight, she would change everything. Hey, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens next. Her name was Leila Harper, 24 years old, with eyes that held stories no one bothered to ask about. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in the private quarters of the Caldwell family. Her job was to scrub floors, polish silver, and disappear into the background of their lives. But the boy's cries had drawn her from the servants' quarters, a pull she couldn't explain. She'd heard him before, night after night, his screams echoing through the penthouse like a wound that wouldn't heal. The nannies had tried everything: lullabies, warm milk, even a white noise machine that cost more than Leila's monthly rent. Nothing worked. But as Leila stepped into the room, her sneakers silent on the marble, the boy's cries softened. He looked up, his tear-streaked face locking onto hers, and something shifted. "You," he whispered, his voice small but certain. "Sing to me." The nannies froze, their eyes darting to Leila like she was an intruder. "You're not supposed to be here," one hissed, her tone sharp with authority. Leila didn't flinch. She knelt beside the boy, whose name was Oliver, and began to hum a melody, soft, lilting, something her own mother used to sing in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, back when life was simpler. The room seemed to hold its breath. Oliver's sobs faded, his eyelids drooping as Leila's voice wove a spell of calm. Within minutes, he was asleep, his chest rising and falling peacefully for the first time that night. The nannies stared, dumbfounded, but Leila didn't notice. She brushed a lock of hair from Oliver's face, her touch gentle, almost maternal, and slipped out of the room before anyone could question her. Word of the incident spread like wildfire through the penthouse staff. By morning, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson, a woman with a face carved from disapproval, cornered Leila in the laundry room. "What were you thinking, interfering like that?" she snapped, her voice low to avoid being overheard. "You're a maid, not a nanny. Stay in your lane, or you'll be out on the street." Leila nodded, her expression unreadable, but inside, her heart pounded. She needed this job. The pay was barely enough to cover her rent and the medical bills piling up for her younger brother, who was battling leukemia in a hospital across town. She couldn't afford to make waves. But as she folded linens, her mind drifted to Oliver's face, the way he looked at her like she was the only one who could save him. She didn't know why her song had worked, but she felt it too, a connection she couldn't shake. That night, Oliver's cries started again. The nannies, desperate, sent for Leila despite Mrs. Grayson's warnings. She hesitated, knowing the risk, but the sound of Oliver's screams pulled her back to his room. This time, she sang a different lullaby, one her mother had taught her about a star that never faded. Oliver's tears stopped almost instantly, his small hand reaching for hers as he drifted off. The nannies watched in silence, their resentment simmering but tempered by awe. This became a pattern over the next week, Oliver refusing to sleep unless Leila sang to him, and Leila sneaking into his room under the guise of delivering fresh towels. Each night, she felt the weight of the penthouse's rules pressing down on her, but she couldn't say no to the boy who looked at her like she was his anchor. Then, one stormy evening, everything changed. Ethan Caldwell returned from a business trip in London, his private jet touching down just as the city was blanketed in rain. He was 38, tall, with sharp features and eyes that could cut through steel. His life was a machine of meetings, mergers, a company that dominated the tech industry, but his son was the one thing he couldn't control. He'd hired the best nannies, the best doctors, but Oliver's sleepless nights were a mystery no one could solve. Exhausted and frustrated, Ethan stormed into the penthouse, expecting chaos. Instead, he found silence. He followed the faint sound of a melody to Oliver's room, where he stopped dead in his tracks. There, in the dim glow of a nightlight, was Leela, sitting beside his son's bed, her voice soft as she sang him to sleep. Oliver was peaceful, his face calm in a way Ethan hadn't seen in months. And then Leela turned, her face catching the light, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His heart, a muscle he'd long thought immune to anything but ambition, began to race. He knew the face. It was impossible, but he knew it. 15 years ago, in a small town in upstate New York, Ethan had been a college kid, reckless and full of dreams. He'd spent one summer working at a diner, where he met a girl named Emily Harper. She was 18, with a smile that could light up the darkest corners of his world. They'd fallen hard for each other, spending nights under the stars, promising forever. But Ethan's father, a ruthless businessman, had other plans. When he found out about Emily, he gave Ethan an ultimatum: cut ties with her or lose his inheritance. Ethan, young and afraid, chose his future. He left Emily without a word, breaking her heart and his own. Now, staring at Leela, he saw Emily's eyes, her cheekbones, the same quiet strength. It couldn't be a coincidence. Was Lila Broken Bar her daughter? Ethan's mind reeled as Leela slipped out of the room, unaware of his presence. He wanted to call after her, to demand answers, but his voice failed him. Instead, he stood frozen, memories flooding back, memories he'd buried under years of success and regret. The next morning, he summoned Mrs. Grayson to his office, a sleek room overlooking Central Park. "Who is that maid?" he asked, his tone clipped. Mrs. Grayson hesitated, sensing the weight behind his question. "Leela Harper, sir. She's new. Started a few months ago. Keeps to herself. Does her work." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Harper," he repeated, the name a ghost from his past. He dismissed Mrs. Grayson and pulled up Leela's employee file, his hands shaking as he read her background. Born in Brooklyn, mother deceased, no mention of a father. The pieces didn't fit perfectly, but the possibility gnawed at him. Was Leela his daughter? Over the next few days, Ethan watched Leela from a distance. He noticed how she moved through the penthouse, invisible to most but essential to Oliver. He saw the way she smiled at his son, the way her voice could calm him when nothing else could. It stirred something in Ethan: a guilt, longing, a need to know the truth. But he couldn't just ask her. What would he say? "Are you my daughter?" The idea was absurd, yet it consumed him. He hired a private investigator, a discreet man who worked for Caldwell Enterprises' security team, to dig into Leela's past. Meanwhile, Leela's life grew more complicated. Mrs. Grayson, sensing a threat to her authority, began scrutinizing her every move. "You're getting too close to the boy," she warned one evening, her eyes cold. "Mr. Caldwell won't like it." Leela nodded, but her resolve hardened. Oliver needed her, and she wouldn't abandon him. The investigator's report came back a week later, and Ethan read it alone in his office, the city lights glittering below. Leela's mother was indeed Emily Harper, who had died of cancer 3 years ago. There was no father listed on Leela's birth certificate, but the timeline matched. Emily had been pregnant shortly after Ethan left her. The realization hit him like a freight train. Leela was his daughter, his and Emily's. The guilt he'd buried for years erupted, tearing through his carefully constructed world. He'd abandoned Emily, left her to raise their child alone, and now that child was working as a maid in his home, soothing his son to sleep. The irony was cruel, and Ethan didn't know how to face it. He started finding excuses to be near Leela, watching her as she worked, searching for traces of himself in her. One night, as she sang to Oliver, Ethan lingered in the doorway, his presence unnoticed until she turned and saw him. Her eyes widened, and she stood quickly, brushing her hands on her apron. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overstep," she began, but he cut her off. "Why do you sing to him?" His voice was softer than he intended, almost vulnerable. Leela hesitated, then said, "Because it helps him. My mom used to sing to me when I was scared. It's all I know to do." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her everything about Emily, about his mistake but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he nodded and left, his heart pounding. The tension in the penthouse grew thicker. Mrs. Grayson, sensing Ethan's interest in Leela, doubled down on her efforts to control her. She assigned Leela grueling tasks, keeping her away from Oliver's room. But Oliver's tantrums returned, worse than ever, and the nannies begged for Leela's help. One night, when Mrs. Grayson caught Leela sneaking into Oliver's room, she exploded. "You're fired!" she shouted, her voice echoing through the halls. Leela stood her ground, her voice steady. "Fire me if you want, but Oliver needs me." "You can't change that." The confrontation drew Ethan from his study, and when he saw Leela facing Mrs. Grayson, something in him snapped. "Enough," he said, his voice like thunder. "Leela stays, and you, Mrs. Grayson, will answer to me from now on." The power shift was immediate. Mrs. Grayson, humiliated, retreated, but her resentment simmered. Ethan promoted Leela to a nanny position, giving her official access to Oliver, but the move only deepened the staff's whispers. Why was the CEO so invested in a maid? Leela, unaware of Ethan's suspicions, threw herself into caring for Oliver, her bond with him growing stronger. But she began to notice Ethan's strange behavior, the way he watched her, the questions he asked about her childhood. It unnerved her, and she started to wonder if there was more to his attention than gratitude. The truth came crashing down one night during a gala at the Penthouse, a glittering event attended by New York's elite. Leela was there, not as a maid but as Oliver's caretaker, dressed in a simple black dress that made her stand out in a sea of designer gowns. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her, and when a guest mistook her for his daughter, the room went quiet. Leela laughed it off, but Ethan's face paled. Later, as the guests mingled, he pulled her aside, his voice trembling. "Leela, I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, Mrs. Grayson, who had been eavesdropping, interrupted with a vicious smile. "Tell her, Mr. Caldwell, tell her how you abandoned her mother and left her to die alone." The words hung in the air, a bombshell that silenced the room. Leela's face drained of color. "What is she talking about?" she whispered, her eyes locked on Ethan. The story unraveled in front of the stunned guests. Ethan confessed everything: his love for Emily, his cowardice, the regret that had haunted him for years. Leela listened, her hand shaking, as the pieces of her life fell into place. The father she'd never known, the man her mother had loved and lost, was standing before her. "You're my father?" she asked, her voice breaking. Ethan nodded, tears in his eyes. "I didn't know, Leela. I swear I didn't know." The room was a blur of whispers, but Leela didn't care. She turned and ran, the weight of the truth too much to bear. For days, Leela avoided the Penthouse, staying with her brother in the hospital. Ethan tried to reach her, leaving voicemails, sending letters, but she wouldn't respond. He threw himself into making things right, paying off her brother's medical bills anonymously and setting up a trust fund in her name. But Leela didn't want his money as she wanted answers. When she finally returned, it was to confront him. In the quiet of his office, she demanded the truth about why he left her mother. Ethan told her everything, his voice raw with shame. "I was weak," he admitted. "I chose money over love, and I've paid for it every day since." Leela's anger softened, replaced by a grief she hadn't expected. "I needed you," she said. "We both did." The confrontation was a turning point. Leela didn't forgive Ethan, not yet, but she agreed to stay for Oliver's sake. Their relationship grew slowly, built on small moments: Ethan helping her with her brother's hospital visits, Leela teaching him the lullabies that calmed Oliver. Mrs. Grayson, humiliated by her failed power play, was quietly let go, her departure a silent victory for Leela. The Penthouse, once a place of cold luxury, began to feel like a home. Ethan, for the first time in years, felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't just a CEO anymore, he was a father, or at least, he was trying to be. Months later, on a quiet evening, Leela sat with Oliver, singing the same lullaby her mother had taught her. Ethan watched from the doorway, his heart full. Leela looked up, and for the first time, she smiled at him, not as a maid, not as a stranger, but as his daughter. The journey to forgiveness was far from over, but in that moment, it felt possible. The rain had stopped, and the city outside was quiet, as if giving them space to heal. "Hey, Thank you so much for watching this story until the end. It means the world to us to share these moments with you. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know, from which part of the country are you watching this video? We can't wait to connect with you.